Hi, this is PR Frank, and today I'm going to show you how to use Adobe Illustrator to create vector art such as this. We're going to go from plain text to learning how to trace that text with the pen tool, to learning how to use the width tool to create stroke effects such as this, using the brushes panel to create a brushed look, and then using graphic styles to create a style like this, and when combined with the brushes panel in strokes to create a final look like that. So let's start with a new document. In this case, I'm making my document 7 inches by 5 inches. And I'll start out with my type tool, click once, and in all caps I'll type the word vector. Vector turns out to be a very nice word to use when you're learning how to use vectors. And I'll resize it and change the font to something nice and meaty. So the font family I'll choose will be Arial Black. And the font size, crank it up all the way to 96. You can also just type in 96 to get that size. And I'll position it in the center. I'll call this layer text. Just double click, rename the layer. Now what I'd like to do with this layer is convert it to outlines. Right now it's just editable text, but if I go to type, create outlines, Illustrator converts it to paths that you can see, which are separate elements that I can move. If I were to expand them, I could move them separately. What I'd like to do is take those and give it no fill, but a black stroke, and then change the stroke color to a specific RGB value. In this case, our RGB value is going to be 0, 153, 255. That will give us a nice blue. There are 255 values of red, green, or blue that are possible in the RGB color mode. I'll say OK to that. And now you can see I have a nice blue stroked vector to trace. In my layers panel, once again, I'll go ahead and lock that layer. I don't want to mess with it, so I keep it locked, and I'll add a new layer, and this time I'll call that layer trace. We're going to use the pen tool. I'm going to show you a couple techniques just in case you're not familiar with the pen tool that will help you in all other pen tool exercises in your lifetime. Let me go ahead and zoom in here on this V. And I'll go to the first corner of that V and click. If I hold down Shift and click at the next corner, it makes a perfectly straight line. If I go to the center of the V, holding down Shift won't work. If I hold down Shift, it wants to make a vertical line. So Shift only helps if you're going to make horizontal or vertical lines. I click there, and I continue clicking at each corner. So now I have what's called a closed path. You may have noticed when I finished the last line and clicked at the first anchor point, a small circle appears next to the pen tool to let me know that it is now a closed path. The advantage of that is when I go to fill this, it will completely fill the interior of this path. If I left an end open, it wouldn't fill it correctly. Now we'll go to the next letter E, and it'll be done in the same manner, all straight lines. Moving on to the C, now we get to really use the power of the pen tool. The pen tool uses a function called a Bezier curve, and we'll get to use that right away with this C. I'll start here at the tip of the C, and I want to emulate this curve. So what happens is when I click and drag with the pen tool, like let's say I go up to the center of the top of the C, if I click and hold and drag, you'll notice that handles come out of that anchor point. So we have that little square in the middle, which is called an anchor point, and then we have the two handles that come out as I click and drag. I can drag up and down and in and out to affect that curve. So I just do that until the curve perfectly matches whatever it is that I'm tracing. and then I release. Now I'll come down to the center of the back of the C and click and hold and drag, and the handles come out once again until I have what seems to be a perfect tracing of that curve using a Bezier curve. Once again, at the bottom center of the C, clicking and dragging. Finish off by coming to this corner of the C, clicking and dragging. Now comes the challenge. If I were to click in this direction to make this straight line, you can see a preview of the curve that will occur. By the way, if you're not getting these curves, it's because you have an older version of Illustrator. This is a rather new feature, and you can turn this off if it annoys you. But this gives me an idea where that curve is going to go, and that's because this handle is pointing out in this direction. If I'm ever wanting to trace something in a direction in which the handle is not pointing, I'm going to have to change that handle. And the easiest way to change it is to hold down the Alt or Option key and click on the end of that handle. And you can do one of two things. You can either put it in the direction you're going, or you can shove it back into the anchor point. In this case, I'm just going to shove it back into the anchor point so that I can make a hard turn and do a straight line to the next corner. Now I'm ready for the next curve. Here's another tip about making curves. I typically think of these curves as hills, and I want to be at the top middle of a hill, or if you think of it as a valley, it's the bottom center of that valley when I want to complete a curve. So in this case, the curve goes from here all the way to here, and the center of that is right down here. I click and hold and drag to get that curve. Come to the middle of the next imaginary hill. Imagine a hill is going from here all the way up and around. I want to go to the center of that and click and hold. I get that nice curve. Here's the next hill I'm creating. I want to cross that hill. I got to go to the top middle of it. Clicking and dragging. And I'm going to finally end up right here at the corner. Click and hold and drag till I get that. Once again, if you remember, we want to turn and go this way with a straight line, but you can see the preview shows that it won't be straight. So I have to once again hold down Alt and move that handle. Another option besides moving the handle is to Alt click on the anchor point, which will get rid of the handle in that direction. So that time I held Alt and clicked right on the anchor point to get rid of that handle. It's a different option than what we did before. And finally, I'm back to where I started. You'll notice as I hover that anchor point, I get that circle next to my pen tool to let me know that I have a what? That's right, closed path. Click that. Okay, now this is not perfect by any means, and I'll finish the T and the O and the R later, but let me zoom in on this C. And as you can see, I have sort of this imperfect curve. While I have it selected, let me change that stroke to a black stroke, just so that I can see the difference between my tracing. Why that didn't work. Let me select it. There we go. Let me change that stroke to a black stroke so that I can see my tracing clearly. So I can see where I have not drawn the path accurately because I can see the blue behind it. Well, no worries. Illustrator is a very flexible application, and these anchor points can be changed very easily using not the selection tool, but the white arrow called the direct selection tool. That'll let me change individual anchor points. So I click that, I go to a trouble spot, such as down here, and I click the anchor point, and the handles pop back out again. Now I can grab a handle, and I can move it, stretch it out, try to make it fit better. Same thing on the other side. Two handles make this curve. It's this handle and the handle on the previous anchor point. Actually, it's the succeeding one in that case. And I just drag that down, out and around until I get really the perfect curve. And in this case, click here, and there's a handle somewhere in there. Let's just use this one again. And I'm just going to keep experimenting with those anchor points and those handles until I get the perfect curve. I can also move an anchor point. I don't have to keep it there. I can move that, swing it back and forth until everything lands as it should, as perfectly as I can get it. Okay, here's another troublesome spot down here. I click on the anchor point. I grab the handle. If I want to move just one handle, I can grab the pen tool again, hold down Alt, and then move that anchor or that handle around by itself instead of it moving both handles. Grab my direct selection tool again, click on that anchor point, and maybe mess with this handle. So what I'm trying to achieve is just this perfect tracing. When you zoom in, you can really see where your errors are, and you can really make some fine-tuned adjustments to your artwork. There we go. That's pretty good. That's a really nice tracing of that letter C. I'll go ahead and finish off the rest of this. Now I have a fully traced word that says vector. And what I'd like to do next is experiment with the things that I can do with the strokes. So one of the things that I can do with strokes on that trace is I can go to the stroke panel, and all it seems that I have control over is the weight. However, if I click on show options in the top right hand corner, I have a lot more options for that stroke. So I can increase the weight of that stroke. I can increase, or I can change what the cap looks like on each one of those strokes. Sometimes it affects the strokes you have, other times it doesn't. I can affect the corners. I can affect where it's originating, whether it's aligned to the center or the inside or the outside of that shape. I can choose to make a dashed line. And if I make these different values, they'll be different sizes. So those are some interesting different ways that you can play around with the stroke using the stroke panel. Another option is to play around with the options panel when we're messing with the stroke. The stroke doesn't have to be uniform. A stroke can vary and have a lot of different looks to give it that more artistic look that you might have used a brush to achieve. We can also drop down basic and choose lots of different kinds of strokes there. Let's revert though back to our normal stroke, and let's duplicate this layer. I'm going to drag this layer to the new item icon. It gives us a name called trace copy, which will change to width. And let's go ahead and turn off and lock these other two layers so that we can isolate that width layer. What I'm going to do is zoom in and show you how the width tool works. Here it is. This is the width tool. If I go to one of my strokes and I click and drag, you'll notice the width tool will increase the width at that point, and it has handles on it just like the pen tool does with anchor points. And I'll just sort of drag at different points to give it an interesting look. And I'll do that for each one of my letters and maybe be consistent, showing the different corners, the bottom left-hand corners kind of drawing outward, kind of gives it a three-dimensional look. All right, now let's go ahead and duplicate our trace layer again, the original stroke layer. Put that above. You notice I can rearrange these layers just by dragging and dropping. Let's name this new layer Brush. I'm going to mess with the Brushes panel now. So as I have that selected and I go to my Brushes panel, which looks like a collection of brushes, if it's not there, you can always go to Window and choose Brushes. As I fly out the Brushes panel, you can see that there are some presets already loaded in there. I can change the stroke to any one of those brush styles to give it that look. Some of them don't work as well as others. I can also go to the top right-hand corner of my Brushes panel and choose Open Brush Library. And I have lots of different libraries from which to choose. So under Vector Packs, I'm going to choose Grunge Brushes Vector Pack. And there I find what you can see was already in my library because I've used it before. That grunge brush makes it look like ink. And I can click through these to find the look that I like. Now, unfortunately, none of these are really making it look like the word vector, but that's okay. Because if I selected this ink one that I liked, I can go to my stroke panel and I can change the weight of that stroke to something even less than 1 just by typing in a decimal value like 0.5. And now I can easily read the word vector as it appears here. So have fun experimenting with that and find an interesting look for your stroke by using a brush preset from the brushes panel. I'm going to do one more layer in this tutorial today. We're going to experiment with the graphic style. So once again, I'll duplicate the trace layer, move it to the very top for now, turn off the brush layer, turn on the trace copy, and we'll call this one graphic. And what we'll do here is we'll fill this with one of our graphic styles. The graphic styles panel has an icon that looks like a square with 2 small squares next to it. So if I click that, you can see that there are some graphic styles in there, and just like the brushes panel, I can click and fly out the Open Graphic Style library and choose any one of these things. In this case, maybe I'll just do textures. And it comes out with a separate panel of textures, and if I click on one of them, it goes ahead and it fills the interior with that texture. That's pretty nice. Then I can just turn on my other layer and rearrange them until it has a look that I enjoy overall. And once you experiment with that for a while, you'll come up with a look that's just your own for that vector art. I hope you learned a lot about how to use the pen tool and how to experiment with vectors and strokes using textures, using the graphic styles panel, also using the brushes panel.